In just over a week's time, the NHL buyout period will begin, and NHL teams will have the opportunity to buy out contracts of existing roster players on their NHL teams. In today's video, we're going to explain how the buyout period works and who are the top 10 most likely candidates to be bought out this summer. We'll get into all that coming up next. Welcome back to Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams, so if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. So the NHL buyout period, a lot of people might have some confusion over how this works, so I wanted to quickly explain how it works and tell you who I think are the top 10 most likely candidates who could be looked at by teams to be bought out this summer. Now basically the buyout period lasts for a period of 15 days and it either begins on June 15th or 48 hours after the Stanley Cup final is completed, whichever happens later. So they put that in place in case the playoffs go longer than expected and the NHL final and the Stanley Cup complete after the 15th. Now this year is looking like that's not going to be the case, so June 15th will begin the buyout period and it will go until June the 30th. Now NHL teams can buy out players and basically pay a percentage of that contract over twice the remaining time left on the contract as of now. So the big other factor here is the player's age. If the player is 26 or younger, then they only have to pay 1/3 of the remaining contract over twice the period of time, and if they're 26 and up, then it's 2/3 of the remaining contract over twice the period of time. So depending on the remaining term, how much money is owed, etc., sometimes it's more beneficial than others to actually go down this process. Looking at a player's cap hit is not always the big part of the story here. Oftentimes it boils down to what is the actual salary compared to signing bonuses. When you see a lot of these top name players getting contracts that are really heavy in signing bonuses, they're basically making sure that they're buyout proof because the signing bonuses have no impact on a buyout. It's only the actual paid salary. So oftentimes for players who have like 80-90% of their wages paid in bonus, there's not much benefit to the team to consider doing a buyout down the road, as they're not going to save a whole heck of a lot of money here. So let's jump into who I think are the top 10 candidates who could be bought out this summer. I want to caution you here as well, this is just my opinion, and obviously these players may or may not be bought out. I would imagine that these teams will attempt to trade these players before doing a buyout. Obviously trading them gets them off their roster and off their cap situation right away, whereas doing a buyout still, has them paying them at least a portion of money for a period of time and will have some impact on their cap situation here. So I fully suspect these players are all potential trade bait, but if trades can't be worked out, then they'll go down this road to do a buyout. First up, we've got Dion Phaneuf, defenseman for the Los Angeles Kings. Now, as we know, Dion Phaneuf was given a very friendly contract from the Toronto Maple Leafs. Many criticize his contract right off the get-go here, but he's been playing with this contract for a number of years, and many have also agreed that it's been a long time since he's really, kind of earned the salary that he's being paid. Of course, he's been traded a couple of times. He was traded to Ottawa, then later to LA. Ottawa did retain part of that contract here as well. Dion Phaneuf has spent parts of 2 seasons now in LA, and things have not really worked out. This past year, he only had 6 points in 61 games played. And now, as you can see for Dion Phaneuf, in the 1920 season, they'd save $4 million, and then in the 2021 season, they'd save $1.5 million. Of course, they do end up tied to the contract over a longer period of time. It creates a roster spot right away. It reduces the amount of money they have to pay him. He can become an unrestricted free agent, maybe get a fresh start somewhere else. Oftentimes, we see a lot of these guys get cheaper contracts as free agents afterwards and get something that's a little bit closer to what their actual value is here. But Dion Phaneuf, in my opinion, to the Kings is a prime candidate to be bought out here over the coming period of time. Next up, we've got Corey Perry of the Anaheim Ducks. Now, some of you might be going, what? Corey Perry? Really? It's like he's got 2 years left. The last number of years have not been overly productive for Corey Perry. He's been on a steady decline. Last year, he spent a big chunk of the year injured as well. So when you take a look at how much time he's missed, how his production has dropped, the cap situation for the Ducks, it does make to me a lot of sense why they would go down this road. I mean, if you look at his decline here in 16-17, he scored 19 goals. 17-18, he was down to 17 goals. And then last year, he was down to 6. Now, I know he missed a lot of time, but even 6 goals in 31 games is not really great compared to what he used to be here. Doing a buyout on Perry would save the Ducks $6 million in 1920. It would save them $2 million in 2021, and it would add 2 more years of a cap hit at $2 million as well. So they'd be tied to the contract for 4 years instead of 2, but it does save them a lot of money, gives them more flexibility here, and I do expect that is something that they really need to heavily consider. I know GM Bob Murray's looking at all options. He still has to name himself a head coach, and there's many other changes he's going to be looking to make to this Ducks roster over the summer. And even though it might be a hard decision to part with one of your longtime veterans who's had a lot of success over his career, I do think it's time to cut bait here with Corey Perry and move on. Next up, we have 30-year-old goaltender Scott Darling of the Carolina Hurricanes. Now, of course, he was acquired from the Chicago Blackhawks and given a very friendly contract as well, and things did just not work out. He did a pretty good job as a backup with the Chicago Blackhawks and given the opportunity to be the starter with Carolina, and things just kind of bombed and went very miserably here. Now, Darling in the past 2 seasons has had save percentages of .888 and .884. Certainly spent most of last year in the minors. Things are just not going well. And we do have reports indicating that the Carolina Hurricanes apparently have told Darling that he's being bought out. But of course, until it actually is announced, we can't 100% confirm that. But it does make a lot of sense. In the 1920 season coming up here, they'd save $2.9 million on their cap hit. And in 2021, they'd save $1.8. And of course, it does add 2 extra years onto the contract where he has 2 years left with a cap hit of 1.18. But overall, this makes a lot of sense. It gets him off the roster, frees up some money and some space here. It allows him to move on. I'm not sure if he's going to get a fresh start somewhere else after the performance he's had. A team might sign him to be an American Hockey League goalie, perhaps. I'm not sure. Clearly, being a starter in the NHL is just not something Darling's been cut out for. Next up, we have another goalie in Mike Condon of the Ottawa Senators. Now, Mike Condon, when he first came over to Ottawa, was a real major help in getting that team into the playoffs a couple of years back when they went on to run to the Eastern Conference Final. That season, he played a large number of games during the absence of Craig Anderson when Anderson had to be away due to his wife's illness. So he was integral in getting them into the playoffs and having them have any success that year. And really, ever since then, the last 2 years have been all downhill from there. I mean, Condon originally started with Montreal, kind of fell out of favor there, ended up with Pittsburgh. The Senators acquired him for next to nothing, so ended up getting off to a phenomenal start. But last year, he spent most of the year rehabbing and in the minors. He didn't even play much in the minors or the NHL. The first few games he played in the NHL were absolutely terrible. He was letting in everything in sight, couldn't stop a beach ball, and obviously they're looking to cut bait here. They still have Craig Anderson and Anders Nilsson on the books now. They have some youngsters that they want to develop as well in the minors, and it just does not make sense to keep Condon around. They would save $2 million in the 1920 season, add an extra year of $1 million, and then they can move on from there. But I think Mike Condon is almost a certainty to be bought out here by Ottawa. Next up, we got Ryan Callahan, veteran forward for the Tampa Bay Lightning. As we know, the Lightning are certainly in a very much of a cap crunch situation. They got some contracts to sign with Braden Point and others. They're rumored to be interested in Erik Karlsson, and there's just no way this can happen without freeing up some cap space, and Ryan Callahan's a prime player to do that. He's down to 1 year on his contract, which makes it a little bit more feasible. Now, of course, like many of these other guys, they're going to try to trade him first. That's first and foremost their main intention here. Why would they not go down that road first? That only makes sense. But if that can't be worked out, then a buyout will be something that they look at next. Now, obviously, Callahan, I think, would be anxious to move on as well, because I think he really wants to play and kind of prove that he can still contribute. He's been used as a spare part in Tampa, not getting a regular shift and a regular playing time. So obviously, Callahan's totally going to be okay with this. But if they go down the route of the buyout, they're going to save $3.1 million for the coming year, and then the year after they'd add 1.5 on. So I do think that Callahan is a very likely candidate here, should they not be able to find a trade. Next up, we have 32-year-old defenseman for the Edmonton Oilers, Kris Russell. Now, the Edmonton Oilers have a lot of things going on. Ken Holland and company now are taking over the Oilers management team, and obviously have a lot of work to be done. They certainly need to reshape a few things here. They need some secondary scoring. They need to reshape that blue line. Need to look at their long-term goaltending situation, and I do think it's possible that Holland could look at a buyout or two to kind of help move on from some of these players. Now, I don't have Milan Lucic on this list here. I think the Lucic contract is still too expensive for them to consider doing that. They'd be tied to him way too long. He's got too much term left at this point. But I do think Russell, on the other hand, is a prime player who could certainly be bought out here. In the 1920 season, they'd save $3 million, and then the year after, they would save only $500K, but then they'd add 2 years of $916. So overall, they'd save a lot of money for the upcoming season, which might allow them to find some more secondary scoring. They have some younger defensemen who could certainly take his spot. I mean, there's certainly a lot of question marks around that blue line as well. But either way, they do have some aging blue liners who probably need to be moved on from. And Russell, I think, is a prime candidate to be done through the buyout if they can't find a trade. Next up, we have Vancouver Canucks forward Tim Schaller. Now, last year, Jim Benning went out and spent a lot of money on a very expensive fourth line for his NHL club here. And obviously, some of these contracts have not worked out all that great. Now, they signed Jay Beagle, Tim Schaller, as well as Antoine Roussel. And many people were kind of really confused as to what the Canucks were doing here. Obviously, it does make sense that they need a little bit of a veteran presence. They need some leadership. And, to a degree, it's not so much the players, it was the contracts that were given. And I think out of the three, Schaller certainly proved to be the weakest link here and likely would be a prime buyout candidate. As you can see in the 1920 season, they'd only saved $966,000. In the 2021 season, though, they only have an additional cap hit of $466, so it frees up a roster spot. They've got a lot of good young talent here that can take that spot and run with it, and I think it only makes sense for them to move on. Last year, he only ended up playing 47 games and put up 10 points. Didn't really work out, and I think it's in the best interest of both parties that they move on, and the buyout's a good way to go, like many of these other guys, if they can't trade him. Next up, we have 24-year-old forward Valeri Nichushkin of the Dallas Stars. Now, he's an interesting case as well. Originally started with Dallas, went back to the KHL for a few years, then came back, and things really have not worked out all that well at all. So Nichushkin put up 0 goals last season in 57 games played. It looks clear that he's just not a fit for the NHL, not a fit for this Dallas Stars team. It makes a lot of sense here that they would do a buyout. In the 1920 season, they'd save $2.25 million. They'd add one additional season on at only $450K. So really, it's a small price to pay. Given his age, they can get away with 1/3 of the contract here. And I just think this makes too much sense for them not to do it. Next up, we have 32-year-old defenseman from the Philadelphia Flyers, Andrew MacDonald. Now, MacDonald was given a very unfriendly contract here a number of years ago. He really hasn't lived up to it for the most part of this contract at all. From the get-go, this was a contract that many people went, really, what? They're paying him this much money? Didn't really make sense. MacDonald, for the most part, has been an okay NHL defenseman, but certainly overpaid, and I think many people would appreciate what he brings to the team more if he was paid a much more reasonable salary here. But the 32-year-old's down to 1 year left on his contract. If they do a buyout for the 1920 season, they will save $3.833 million, and they would only add 1.9 on for 1 extra year since he's down to 1 year left, make him an unrestricted free agent. Maybe he can find an additional contract here as a UFA, hard to say. But Andrew MacDonald, certainly a prime candidate here with all the young defenders that Philly has on their roster. I mean, they got, Gostisbehere, Provorov, Sanheim. You got Philippe Myers looking for time here as well. Samuel Morin hopefully can play more this year. Like, they have a lot of guys who can actually step up into the plate here. So they clearly have a number of younger defensemen on much more reasonable contracts here that can fill this role. So I think he's a prime candidate here to be gone from Philly before next season. Next up, we have 31-year-old forward from the Buffalo Sabres, Vladimir Sobotka, who came over to the Sabres in the St. Louis Blues trade for Ryan O'Reilly. Now, of course, this is not really a trade that looks all that great for the Sabres. Obviously, they got Sobotka and Berglund, as well as Tage Thompson. The Sabres look like they got a pretty good return of players, but now there's not going to be a whole lot left from this trade. Obviously, they got Sobotka, Berglund, as well as Thompson, and some picks here. Obviously, Berglund's already gone. Now, Sobotka could be bought out. Neither one of those veteran forwards really worked out with the Sabres at all, and given the amount of young forwards they have there looking for time and looking for a spot, I think that it only makes sense for them to continue with this. In the 1920 season, they would save $2 million, and then they would add 1 extra year on of $1 million in 2021. He only put up 13 points in 69 games last year. Said along with Patrick Berglund, neither one of those guys worked out. I know Berglund had some other stuff going on, which certainly contributed to that. So far, you get Ryan O'Reilly playing with the Blues here in the Stanley Cup Final. So that's looking like a bad trade for the Sabres, but a trade that they felt that they needed to make based on O'Reilly being unhappy and basically wanting out of Buffalo. So unfortunately, that deal did not go well. However, I do see a buyout being a great option for the Sabres here with Sobotka so they can move on. So those are my top 10 candidates I think are most likely to be bought out this coming summer during the buyout period coming up here in about a week's time. Obviously, I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on the players I selected. And like I said, there are definitely some other players I agree that could possibly be bought out as well. So I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on any other players that you think are likely to be bought out here coming up June 15th to June 30th. If you're new to the channel, I hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams, and there's plenty of content here for all hockey fans to enjoy. So if you're new, subscribe for more content just like this one, and give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it as well. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.